Good. Now we're beginning today. Yesterday we talked about making ourselves into a menorah in the Holy Temple. The menorah in the Holy Temple, we talked about this last week also, but the menorah in the Holy Temple was basically a inspiration and a impetus to love God, Now the Rebbe is explaining to us a little bit how to do that, how to actually love God, what it means to love God. So first of all, we have to understand what God is, and this is supposing that God is, that there is God. That requires faith. But once we believe that there is such a thing as God, now we have to see what is there lovable about God. Why should I substitute loving God for loving other things? So the answer is you don't have to substitute God for loving. You just have to love God more than you love everything else. And when you really come to love God more than everything else, then you'll see that the only reason that you're loving everything else is because you're loving God. So let's put this in the proper perspective. Let's put it in the proper perspective. Let's say, I don't want to take bad examples, but let's take a good example. A person that becomes a patriot. He loves America. He's consumed with America. Everything he does is for America. Right? Just to take an example. Before that, he was just an individual. He was a regular person. He lived in who knows wherever, some other country, and he came to America, and he loves America. Suddenly, he loves America. Now, everything he does is going to be for America. So he flies the American flag, but he's got a family. He's got a job. So his family and his job, it's all, he's got a flag on the wall and pictures of the president in the room. And he's always, saying good things about the government, and he's always trying to convince other people good things about the government. And he does everything that he can to, he always pays his taxes on time, and he's always praising and things. So what happened? Before, he was a normal person thinking about himself, and now everything that he does is directed to something which is more real than just himself. The country, before he was an individual person, and now he's devoted to a big thing, the country, which has 300 million people in it, and it represents truth and justice and the American way, and all the good things that America stands for. That's what. So now he's devoted to this bigger thing. It's more real, so to speak, than he is. And he's willing to give his life for his country. Give me liberty or give me death. He's willing to give his life for the country. Something big. Okay. So now let's so we see it's possible for a person to put his life into a bigger context and translate everything that he does into a bigger set of values, what he considers to be a more real set of values than anybody else. And it's the same thing with religion, right? Person, his whole life becomes consumed with, he's going to go to heaven. He'll go to heaven if he believes in this, person, whatever, he's a Baha'i or he's a whatever it is, a Buddhist or something like that. So whatever religion it is, believes this person is going to get me into heaven. Now heaven becomes the main thing. He wants his kids to believe in that religion and his house is that religion. Okay, now we have Judaism. What does Judaism teach? Judaism teaches that there's a creator to the universe. There's a creator, and that God is creating us. And the more you think about this, that God is creating everything. He's creating all the other powers and the angels that all the other religions believe in, or forces, or levels of consciousness, or the ghosts, or whatever they believe in. And God is creating everything. He's creating everything right now. So okay. Now, as soon as you start really thinking, is this really true? Can this really be true? And the Rebbe is going to give us a big list of how to do it, how to think. Then you start, all of a sudden, everything you do now is changed. You're not living in your little small individual world anymore. You're realizing that your little small individual world is part of a bigger plan. But in Judaism, it's even more. We come to see that our God, the God of Israel, cares about everybody, and everyone is important. It's not that you lose your importance, you lose your individuality. Your individuality is enhanced because God is creating your individuality. So all of a sudden you start having more and more reasons to love God. Then when you think even more deeply, then you can love God without any reasons, just because the whole existence of all being, it comes from God without any reasons whatsoever. In other words, even things that aren't good, seemingly, they all come from God. God is infinitely, infinitely good. There can't be anything bad that comes from God. That's a whole different level, but it's all basically the same thing as love. Love. Okay, so it says, let's go. So one thing about God that we see is that anything that you can say about God, how he creates the world, how he creates the angels, how he enlivens everything, how he directs everything, wherever, all that is how God has come down low to the point where we can describe him, how we can define what God is. Because God creates consciousness, God creates time. Before God created the world, there was nothing. There was nothing, so no such thing as before the world. There was no before or after. This makes no sense whatsoever. So, and if that we can describe God, that he can, that means that God has come down, so to speak. He made himself understandable to the level that we can appreciate him. So that's what it says. B'makom she'ata motza gedulaso, the place where you find God's greatness, there you find. Let's see what's going on. 1 second. What's this? Say hello to Menachem. I will. Menachem.
He left already. He
What?
left already.
Oh, he left. Okay.
He was upset.
What?
He was upset.
Oh, he was upset about what? What? Okay, not important. Not important. Okay, we'll talk about that later. I wasn't wearing a jacket. Okay, there we go. Ready? Now, Menachem, if you see this in the thing, I'm sorry. Whatever you're upset about. Okay, let's go. This is the place where you find God's greatness. There you find God's humility. What does it mean? That God came down. God came down in order. So the place where you find God's greatness, the only reason you can even call God great is because he has come down. He has become humble, so to speak. He has humbled himself and brought himself down to the point where you can describe. So think what God himself is. Like it says, a mashpili liros, that God comes down to see in the heavens and the earth. She'etzlo, that by God, nechshav zot lahashpala, this is considered to be a descent. Va'al and humility, lachayos ruach shfelim, in order to enliven the spirit of the low creations. So God does not enliven the world by means of angels or whatever it is. It's God personally himself, but he does it in such a way that it is a tremendous, he tones himself down in order to come down to this level. Like it says, somech nofli, that which God, he supports the fallen. Rofei cholim, he heals the sick. He supports, zokef, he stands up those who are bent over. In other words, God cares about his creations and he helps them. He heals the sick. He supports the poor, the indigent, etc., etc. And that which God is called the king, he's called the king over the earth. Liot ke'eretz halazu ashfela sheyorda. It says that God mashpili ba'oretz. He comes down. It says to the earth. What does it mean to the earth? So we say that God creates even the heavens. Even the heavens. That God comes down to create the heavens, that's what's called earth. When the world of Atzilut by God is considered to be a tremendous descent for godliness. In other words, don't think that you understand what God is because you see a beautiful sunset, or because you start thinking about, wow, God actually creates the sun and the moon. That's amazing. It truly is amazing. But that's just touching on the bottom of the level of God's speech. The Kain Mashakatuv, that what it says that God's so, oh, we did this already. Yes. Okay, that's what it means that God becomes a king. Okay, and therefore, Zot Yavin, therefore you should understand. V'shuma libo, when you put in your heart, you want to become a light in the menorah of the holy temple where you can do it, but you have to ignite yourself. You have to bring the fire. Yarchiv dato, you have to start thinking into the greatness of God. The niflos ma'asav, and God's tremendous wonders. Beriboy olamos, in all of the worlds ad ein cheka, without any end. In a yaskil, then you will understand shezeu anvasnuso, that is really God's humility. Ve'ein aroch, and there's no comparison to God at all. She'enu begeder almin kalal, that God cannot be considered to be in the worlds at all. God is not an existence. Exactly the opposite. God makes all other existences equal. The highest of the spiritual worlds and the lowest, whatever's pebble on the ground or whatever in the seashore, it's all totally equal by God. So automatically, as soon as you think about this, then what is God? And this God is creating me. Then your soul will become ignited. The nefsha, the or, and your heart will shine in the light of love. With all of your soul, really. Let's say it migeder almost. So the Rebbe is giving us a step-by-step method by means of which we can arouse love for God. And it all begins with thinking about that God is creating me. God is not far away, he's creating me. He's ultra super accessible, infinitely close to me. And God cares about me and he loves me. And he's with me all the time. And when you start to think about what is so, a person can think, well, God is with me all the time, so who needs him? What type of a God is that? I want a God that's sitting up in the heavens and that he's really godly, right? He's really godly. So you got that also. In fact, whatever you think is godly, that's just a creation, just like you're a creation. God is creating the whole entire business, but he's also creating you. When you think about that, you realize, wow, this is really true. God is really creating me. Then mi li b'shamayim, like King David said, what do I care about the heavens? I don't want to be anything with you. All I want is you. My flesh and my heart is expiring to you, God. Zeo, that's what it means. You should love God with all of your heart. Now, this, of course, is not, you can't do this the whole day. You have to a family, you have to wake up in the morning, you have to go to your job, can't sit about all the time and just say, God is great, God is great. But once you do feel that this is especially for the time of prayer in the morning, especially when you say Shema Yisrael, listen, Jews, God is one. Understand, Jews, that God is one. And then you say you should love God with all of your heart, all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your might. That's when you should be thinking about these thoughts, about how infinitely close God is to me, and how infinitely distant he is, even from the highest of the spiritual worlds. He's creating the whole entire business. When a person thinks about that, then he becomes tremendously enamored with his creator. Idolatry is thinking that there's something in the middle. Now, listen, God works through other things. God works through angels. He works through the world. He even works through the planets. He says the planets are actually like angels. So there is some basis to like astrology and those things. God works through those things. The world is pointing to the Creator, and God works through the Creator. But you can't pray or believe that any one of God's creations is the Creator. You can have helpers. A person can go to the doctor to get healed. The same thing is you can go to a big tzaddik and ask for him to pray for you. You can go to your next door neighbor and ask him to pray for you. Even more, it's a commandment to pray for people, and God answers prayers. So if someone comes to you and says, please pray for me, so pray for the person. It could be your prayers will work, but it doesn't mean that the person is praying to you. He's praying to God, but he's doing it with your help. Because it's just like you want to get your car fixed. So you go to an auto mechanic. You don't pray to God, please God help my car. So going to an auto mechanic should be against the Torah. It should be against it. That's blasphemy, isn't it? Only God fixes you. No, it's not. Of course, that's ridiculous. God wants us to utilize everything in the world to help us, even to help us in spiritual ways. Because love is the sword, because that's what it means you should love God. Loving God, that's what's called lighting the candles. We'll see the difference between lighting them in the nighttime and the daytime. Love comes from the source of the word ava. Ava means desire. Ava means to desire in Hebrew. She'u milashen chayfetz, which is a language of desire and ratzon and will. I know, namely, ratzon, re'uta deliba, the arousal of the heart, that God should be our God and we should cling to God really. The al yadeh, by means of this arousal from below, will fall upon a person love from above. Lahagdil medura eish. Okay, now here we go. God, of course, helps us, and He helps us in every step of this process. First of all, God gives us the ability that we can love Him in the first place. So let's see, what happens if I do this? 1 second. No, I don't want that. I think that just takes the whole picture up. Okay. Let's try it. No, that's not what I wanted. Okay. Can I get out of this? 1 second. There we go. Okay. Okay, now, again, a basic fact that Hasidut, especially Hasidut Chabad, points out and stresses very, very strongly. God reacts to what we do, and sometimes God inspires us. In other words, sometimes God reacts to what we do, and sometimes we are the ones that react to what God does. God starts. Now, if you think about it for 1 second, I mean, it's obvious that God starts everything. I mean, God creates us. So God obviously is the instigator of everything, but God creates us in such a way, that's the whole story of the Bible, that God creates us in such a way that He reacts to what we do. God put the world in the hands of man. Man has to coronate God. Without man, God is not a king. A king has to be a king over subjects. Subjects mean people that have free will. You can't be a king of the dogs or the king of the ocean. Maybe in Greek mythology there's such a thing. A true king is a king over people. People, you have to have people that have free will. A king has to be a ruler over subjects that are something like him. The same thing, God created people in His image. Human beings are His image. And we have free will. And God put the world in our hands. So to speak, God needs us to be a king, if He wants to be a king. God can't be a king over the angels. He already has the angels. The angels automatically are screaming out that God is is holy, and they're burning up to God. God says, that's the way I created you. There's no big novelty. God created man, that man should make God a king. Therefore, we have free will. Where do we get this free will from? From God. Where do we have the even ability to love God? It comes from God. But when we do use this free will properly, and when we do use it to love God, then God reacts and gives us even more inspiration. That was where there falls, once a person loves God, then there falls upon him a new, higher type of love from above. Lahagdil medura, to increase the flame of fire in his heart. Yoter, even more, mikadei koach enoshi, than his ability is to accept on his own. Even higher than the shorsh nishma, than his soul. A person on his own can come to a certain level of loving God and reality, but then God gives him a blessing. Shehi begetter of a gabul, of a nivra, lekirba el Hashem, to come closer to God even more. The bitl love b'metzius mamash. And there used to be, in the time of the temple, first temple, second temple, and really to a certain degree it exists now also, prophecy. Prophecy. The Rebbe has a big speech about it. How prophecy exists now. Let me see. Let me try this here. Try something. Try something. Oh, that's better. So there is nowadays, there's prophecy. There's prophecy. the prophets stopped being recorded in the beginning of the Second Temple. With Haggai and Malachi and Zechariah, they were the last of the three official prophets, but prophecy still exists. What's the idea of prophecy? Prophecy is that a person thinks all these thoughts that we have over here. Maimonides talks about it. He says that's the basis of Judaism. Moses was a prophet. He was the super prophet, Moses. Every word that came out of Moses' mouth was prophecy from God. The only Torah that the Jews heard was the first two commandments. The first two commandments they heard at Mount Sinai, and they couldn't take any more. But Moses could take it. So just like the first two commandments the Jews heard at Mount Sinai was a gift from above, God gave it from above. So also prophecy in general is a gift from above, but they have to be prepared. So the preparation for prophecy is that you think about God. You think about God and you arouse your heart to God. And the more you arouse your heart to God and the more you think about God, as the more you become open to prophecy. Prophecy. Today, there's no prophecy in the same way as it was back then. And, it's a very, very difficult thing. They used to be, in the time of the temple, they used to have all schools. Like nowadays, they have yeshivas. But now they have yeshivas that boys sit and they learn Torah. Back then, they would sit and learn Torah, but they would also think about God, contemplate God's greatness. And then they would fall upon them prophecy. And that's why all the prophets came. The major prophets, Isaiah and Joel and Hosea and all these prophets, they all came to that. These are messages from above. He says, what is the message from above? They prepared themselves from below. They loved God, and then God sent them love from above. Bittul of this surrender by means of this love we had before, and that's the idea of Aaron. One second, where is this? 1 second, let me get my pointer back again. That's the idea of Aaron. Aaron was the one who lit the candles. Kana Rabbah. This is a spiritual level, but it's also a person. Aaron, like today, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, all the Rebbes of Chabad, and all the big tzaddikim, their main goal is to get the Jewish people to love God. This is especially a goal in Chabad Chassidut. Ki ahavta, because when it says for instance, Shema Yisrael, it says, understand, Jews, you should love God. Is our God. God is one. Shema Yisrael. And right after that, it says, V'ahavta. You must love God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your might. The word V'ahavta is the numerical value. If you add it up all together, it's the numerical value of 2 times Ohr, light. Right? Light is 207. And if you count V'ahavta, it comes out to be, 407. 407. Yes, 1 second. Is this right? Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. 2 times 207. What is 207 2 times? 414. Let's see if it works out. Ahavta is 400, and 6, 7, 12, 14. Exactly. Ve'ahavta is 2 times the word love. Ve'ahavta, Ve'ahavta is 2 times the numerical value of light, not love. Ve'ahavta is 2 times the numerical value of light, or, and it's called Bechina Zut. This is called Behetivo. This 2 times is what was done in the morning when Aaron lit the 2. There were 7 lights, right? 1 light remained light. 1 light remained in the morning. From that 1 light, it says he lit up 2 lights. Shematov, the Chesed, Alav, Mashpia al Ruach Shvelim. That's what God gives from above. Le'etiv lahagdil et ha'ava shlamata. That's a love which comes to increase the love which is from above. 2 times love. Okay, so maybe we can also say like this: the 2 times love. 1 love is the love that comes from God from above, and the other love is the love that we have from below. that inspires us to love God. But really, gam eserusa dilatata, even the arousal from below, we said before, that a person desires to love God. This is also a gift from God. Lo lefi koach nefesh adam, according to the ability of a person. Umazgal. And this is called ba'alos Aaron es Aaron. This is called Aaron lifting up the lights. Ha'elyon, shehu anoten koach b'kanes Israel. This is what Aaron does in the nighttime. Aaron gives power to the Jews in the nighttime when there's exile. In other words, Jews on their own have no ability to love God. Let's see it in another normal way. Normal people do not love God. Normal people do not love God. You can appreciate God. You can thank God, right? Especially God does a miracle. Someone was sick, he gets better. So you can thank God for what he does. But to actually feel that God really exists and creates me, normal people don't feel this. In fact, we can almost say that nobody feels it. And the only way you can feel such a thing like this, because God, like we said before, is infinite. He's not a thing. We can't translate this into any way that we can really appreciate God. We can appreciate certain things that God does. But anything you can appreciate what God does, you can have an atheist or whatever and say, listen, it's not God that's doing it. That's just nature. And it just happens to be beautiful. And there's an infinite number of worlds. And there's other worlds where things didn't work out so well. And this world does work out, right? It just happened to be that way. Could be, right? Could be there's no God. It just, people just evolved from, amoebas or something like that. It could be, people believe that there was big, that's the whole story of Hanukkah. The Greek philosophers really believed this. Things just always were, that's all. Right? You can't, just like the heavens go out infinitely, you can't imagine where the end is. So also you can't imagine where the beginning is. Maybe there's no beginning to time either. Who knows? So all of this is a possibility to understand what God is, to have a conception of God. That's called faith. Faith. You cannot come, if you come logically to understand what God is, then that's not God. That's not God. That's not a God that you love. You can come to love. The feeling that God exists, that's called faith. But we have to increase that. That's what's talking about in thinking. You think deeply about what if God really does exist. You start to feel, wow, it's really true. It's really true. But still, it's totally above our understanding. And then, in order to have an emotion about God, this is a big gift from God. So says the Rebbe, there's two types of lighting the candles. In the morning, they lit 2 candles, and that remained the whole day. Some people says only 1 candle, but 2 candles. And in the nighttime, they lit all 7 the candles. This is that which they did in the nighttime. The night in Judaism, every date begins with the nighttime, right? So day begins with the nighttime. So it says, in the nighttime, that's what Aaron lit. That's God beginning. God begins the process. God begins the process, and he gives us inspiration from above. He gives us the ability from above to love him. That's called Aaron lighting the candles. He's the one that gives power to the Jewish people to arouse this love. That's what it means in the evening. Then when it's nighttime, darkness on its own, a person on his own cannot be aware of God, and he certainly can't come to love and appreciate God like he comes to love appreciate a glass of water if he's thirsty, or money in the bank if he has to pay for something. Then you can appreciate that. What does God do for you? Right? What does he do for you? You have big atheists that don't believe in anything, and God gives them success, and God gives them power, and God gives them health. Right? So who says it's God? Maybe it's just natural. So in order to really come to love God, it's a big gift from God. You can't take it for granted. You can't take it for granted. So that's called Aaron lighting the candles in the nighttime. That's the original ability we have to love God. Of Midas Boker, but in the morning, Shehu Midas Avram. That's the idea of Abraham, Isha Chesed, Vayashkem Avram Boker. Avram woke up early in the morning. This is what's called Heitivo. What is it? That's what's called good. so to speak, lighting the lights yourself. Now, usually when it says that Abraham woke up in the morning, this is talking about also God's giving us the ability to love him. He says there's one way that God gives us the ability, increases our ability to love him. Here what he's saying, this is what it seems to me. In the nighttime, God originates in us this ability to love him. And in the morning, he enhances it. He enhances our ability to love him. In a Miza Adam, who is a person that can reach to this, that he can reach to the level of Aron Elyon? How can he reach the level? How can we even approach these levels to appreciate these gifts? That's by means of Torah and commandments. That's another gift that God gave us. God gave us Torah and the commandments. Now we're going to answer the questions we had in the beginning. What does it mean, ner mitzvah v'Torah Ohr? It says that the commandments are like a lamp, and the Torah is the light that comes from the lamp. But the commandments, nimshachim, they come from a very high place. When a Jew does a commandment, that gives him a feeling, an attachment, an ability that he becomes a vessel for this inspiration of love from God. Therefore, ein ba'em hasaga klal kamashal hashemen. Therefore, the commandments cannot be understood at all. Like we had before, like oil. Oil, it says, is a thing that has no taste to it alone. The level of the commandments, that's something like the oil we talked about before. It's a thing that can't really be digested. Same thing, the commandments, you can't really understand them. All you know is that God told us to do them. The biggest Talmudic genius and holiest person, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and when he does a commandment, it's basically the same thing as when we do a commandment. You can't really possibly understand it. Even though the fact is that when the Rebbe or a big tzaddik or whatever, when he does a commandment, his heart is much more aroused than ours. He appreciates the godliness of the commandment more than what we do. But still, nevertheless, basically, commandments cannot be understood. We do the commandments basically because God told us, and we don't know what God is. We have no idea what God is. But we know that God is. We can feel somehow or other that this is a godly thing. And you can see examples of this all the time. I see it every day. Like I say, I go and I put tefillin on people in this public place every day for about a half an hour. And you just see people that they don't even know how to put on tefillin. They're willing to put on, they say, okay, we'll do it. Right? They'll put on tefillin. It's no logical reason whatsoever. They're not doing it because they're sick or they want somebody to get better. A lot of them don't believe that it even helps in anything. That they don't believe in God whatsoever. But they put on tefillin. Why do they put on? It's a Jewish thing. It's a possibility to do something Jewish. And this is everywhere in Israel. You see in the Chabad people especially, they go into shopping centers and all these places where people are just going about their business, and people actually stop and they put on tefillin. And sometimes people stop and put on tefillin, and they don't know how. Okay, I'll stop. I'll put on. Why in the world would they do that? Right? Why didn't they do it? Why? So the answer is they themselves don't know why. I'm a Jew, and this is a Jewish thing. They realize it's a Jewish thing, and they do a Jewish thing, and they're not even religious. So that's what it means, because they feel somehow or other this is what making God a king. Come on, melech, like a king that rules over his people, and the king is someone that's incomprehensible. Is you can't touch the king. He's Gavu Alam. The king is exalted above them. It used to be the king would come, everybody would bow down. You just negate your whole being to the king. The people do the will of the king, believe Ta'am V'das without any logic whatsoever. He misses the melech, the commandment of the king. It's a commandment of the king. V'leiv malachim, in the heart of the king, the desires of the king, ein chika, you can't understand. Like I say, I can only find examples from the most examples that come to mind is like Napoleon. Napoleon, when his personality was such that he just commanded people, and people just did whatever he said. Napoleon he commanded this huge, massive army of, I don't know how many men it was. I'm not a historian. A million men. What is how many? And they did whatever he wanted to do, and they won battles, and they did this, and they did it for the sake of liberty and fraternity. It wasn't really to enlarge France or something. Napoleon said it was his idea, right? That that's what they were going to do. Napoleon was put into he lost the battle, the big battle. He was put into exile, and he escaped from exile. And within a few days or whatever, he had a huge army of 100,000 men. People just were crazy to do whatever he said, right? Because they considered it to be a king. He didn't want to be. He wasn't going to be a king. He wanted to be an emperor, whatever it was. But he was an amazingly talented person. It's true, but his personality somehow or other demanded that people do follow him because he was the king. They didn't understand. They were willing to throw their lives away. Says that's okay. That's the downside of the fact that there's a king. But the fact is that God is a king. And doing what God wants means the commandments for the Jews. Doing what God wants, the commandments. The non-Jews also have commandments. It's not exactly the same thing as the Jews. The commandments of the non-Jews are basically understandable. They're basically understandable. There's 7 negative commandments, 7 prohibitions for the non-Jews. And there's, according to some opinions, 30 positive things that they're supposed to do: honor your parents, love God, give charity, pray every day, etc. But it's not the same thing exactly as what the Jews' commandments are. The commandments of the Jews are physical, limited things, exactly measured. That because of this, the command, that because of them we're commanded. God gave a commandment: take leather, do this with the leather. It becomes, now it's, you have tefillin, put them on your arm, put them on your head. You did a commandment. What that is. This is what God wants. But nevertheless, well, derech mashal, this is like a person. Shetofis is a melech. If a person grabs a hold of the king, one of his limbs, let's say his finger, umamshichon draws it to him, hine gam hayoso shebekirbo, even when the king is drawn to him, nimshach acharav. I know shebekirbo nimshach acharav. So therefore, when a person, let's say he grabs a hold of the corner of the king's garment and he pulls the king, so it ends up that the king in his entirety is pulled after that person. The same thing is also Yaminat Chabkeni. When we do a commandment, God embraces us. God embraces us. You can say, once again, how many gods are there? Every Jew puts on tefillin, so every Jew draws God. How can that possibly be? So the answer is, it can't possibly be, but it is. It doesn't make any sense. The commandments don't make any sense. Why? Because the Ramach Avorim, the 248 commandments are, let's see how we do this. Here we go like this. The 240 commandments, they are the 248, and they are the 248 limbs of God. And by means of doing these commandments, so what, so to speak, it's like grabbing on one of the limbs of God and drawing God to you. There is drawn after the uniting of God himself and his glory. And that should light up our lights. And that's the idea of the lights of the holy temple. They were also commandments, just like these other commandments. But the commandments then in the holy temple were also to give us an emotional, aid us to do an emotional thing. Now we have to remember, to love God is also a commandment. So we have to love God without any reason, above logic. But you can't do that. You can't love something with no reason. Love is a personal trait. You have to have something personal. You can act, you can go to actor school, and you can act like you love God, right? But that's not the commandment. The commandment is not to act. The commandment is the truth. Actually, in order to be true, so you have to have something true, right? You have to have a true reason. And that's the idea of all this thinking and making God personally love to you. So the Rebbe says there's 2 aspects of this. There's in the nighttime, that's how God begins. He instigates your love. And then there's in the morning when God enhances your love for him. And that's the 7 lights of the menorah are the 7 different types of Jews and the 7 aspects of love found in every Jew. Okay, now let us do the Yom Yom. And tomorrow we'll learn this about the difference between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, lighting the candles. Just in briefly, nowadays we light the Hanukkah candles. I'm not sure we're going to do this, but I'll tell you in a short way anyway, because it's very interesting. Nowadays we light Hanukkah candles. Everybody lights the Hanukkah candles. You start off with 1, and the next night you light 2, and the next night you light 3, and the next night 4, etc. You increase. But really, the according to the law, the basic law of Hanukkah, you don't have to even light 8 lights. You can light 1 light every night. If, let's say, you only have 8 candles, so the first night you light 1 candle, and the second night you light 1 candle, and the third night you have 1 candle, that's enough. 1 candle every night is the bones of the commandment. That's the commandment. And if you want to be special, then each person in the household, each male in the household, he lights 1 candle. But it says that if you want to be from the special of the special of the special, then you light according to the nights of Hanukkah. Beit Shammai says you start off with 8. That's how many nights there are in Hanukkah. And every night you light 1 less. You light 1 less. So according to Beit Shammai, if you go by Jewish houses and you see 2 candles lit in every house, so you know that this is the 6th night of Hanukkah. Right, the 6th night of Hanukkah. I guess you said the 7th night of Hanukkah. This is the 7th night of Hanukkah. It's next to the last. You see 1, you know it's the last night of Hanukkah, the 8th night. Because it started off with 8 and it got less and less and less. That's according to Beit Shammai. According to Beit Hillel, and the law goes according to Beit Hillel, according to Beit Hillel, you start off with 1 and you increase every night. And that's what we do. Okay, so but that don't take it for granted that that's what we do, that's what's called the essence of the law. In fact, if you don't have 8 candles the last night, you light 1. That happened to me once. We went to a prison, and then all we had is 1 candle. We gave out, it was the last night of Hanukkah, we had 8 candles for each room. They allowed us to light the candles in the rooms, in the cells. But there was 1 room that we didn't notice, and all we had is 1 candle left over. And that's good enough. That's the commandment. They can make the blessing on it and everything. 1 candle is enough. 1 candle is enough. Okay, so 1 candle is enough. If you're really special, then everybody in the family lights 1 candle. And if you're special of the special, then you light according to the nights. Some according to say that each person lights according to the nights. That's what we do in Chabad. I think everybody does it that way. Because every person lights according to the number of lights, and they go according to the nights, and they go according to Beit Hillel. They increase. First night 1, second 2, 3, 4. So that's what it says. This is what it says in the Talmud. It's in Shabbat, the Talmud in Shabbos. It says that Talmud, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught us the commandment of lighting the candles of Hanukkah. Beit Shammai says the first night you light 8, and from here you get less and less, like the oxes on the holiday of Shavuot. On the holiday of Shavuot, they sacrificed altogether 70 oxes. There's 7 nights of Shavuot, and they sacrificed 70 oxes in the Holy Temple. But they didn't do it 10 oxes every night to come out to 70. They started out the first night with 13, and then they went down to 12, then 10, then 11, then 10. First night they started with 13, then 12, then 11, then 10, then 9, then 8, etc. And then 7. So it came down to an average of 10 every night, but they started off 13 and they ended off with 7. It got less and less. Beit Shammai says that's like how we're going to light the candles also. We start off big and we get less and less. Beit Hillel says, no, I don't agree. I agree there should be a different number of candles every night, and we should light according to the nights, but I say we should start off small and we should get big. Why? Because there's a principle in Judaism, Ma'alim B'Kodesh, that we increase always in holiness. We don't go down in holiness. We only increase. And that what's the oxes got less. That's an exception. That's an exception. We don't learn from that exception. So says Beit Hillel, and that's the law. As we'll talk about more tomorrow. Now let's do the Dvar Malchut.